Hey guys, thank you so much for coming over just to learn a bit more. So I'm just going to teach a few things from week one in terms of what we talk about in the group program. So we spend like an hour and a half going through this. So I'm not going to do the whole thing today. Just want to give you a kind of taster, I guess. So if you haven't received the most comprehensive emotional eaters guide, then I will send that out to you, because that's really helpful as a starting point, just to think about the three things that are really key around mental health, around nutrition, and around fitness if you're looking or considering to have bariatrics, or have had it and are looking to sustain the results. And so really what we talk about in the first session is around what is emotional eating and defining our eating responses, looking at the purpose of emotions and why we have them, and then emotional regulation and how we can impact that. And then we look at the neurobiology actually of eating and where we derive pleasure from. So I guess I just wanted to start with emotional eating, because I think that often if you've been on this journey for some time, the emotional eating roller coaster can be really, really challenging, and it's really hard to get off of it. And a lot of people don't understand. So there's a lot of judgment around, being overweight and considering bariatrics. And I just want to say that actually, having surgery is not the easy way out. And, people may have a view that it's for lazy people, or for people that just want a quick fix. Actually, if you're considering surgery, it's one of the hardest things, because it's going to change the way you eat for the rest of your life. And you're going to have to, accommodate your lifestyle for that. And I'm sure everyone watching this is aware of that. So in reality, the roller coaster of emotions doesn't disappear because, you've got over the ability to be able to, to eat too much or excessively. So that stops because of the surgery. But actually our emotions, if we're not in touch with them, are still kind of going up and down. And actually often our response to eating is either to suppress, push down an emotion, or to soothe, to feel pleasure from an emotion. And really we need to get underneath those feelings and understand why we have them and what it is that we're trying to push down or soothe in order to start to address the behaviour, really, because taking away the food will not take away the feelings necessarily. And if you've been in any support groups or spoken to other people that have had surgery, I know from working in this field that emotions and managing our emotions is one of the most difficult things. So we'll really start to unpick some of those emotions and the emotional roller coaster through the group. I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about was our reaction to emotions and our natural responses, because I think that the two key emotions that come up in the work that I do are fear and anxiety, or sadness and depression. And the reality is that we have fear and anxiety, fight and flight, because in some ways that motivates us to do things. Like sometimes when we've got a bit of time pressure or pressure to get something done, a deadline, that it gets us into action, it gets us up, it gets us doing something. And actually that's really helpful. And back in the day when we used to be hunter-gatherers, that would, get us out hunting food, looking for survival. But actually now in our, on our sedentary lifestyles where we sit down a lot in offices all day, or are quite still, having this adrenaline pumping round, and this fear and this anxiety pumping round our bodies actually makes us really, really, really anxious. And I think sometimes an often response to that emotion is to eat, to get rid of that feeling, to push it back down. So we really need to understand that actually fear, anxiety is normal, and that we need to be able to tolerate it to some level. I think when it's constantly too high, then that's a warning sign that we need to unpick or understand what's driving that. But actually having a level of fear and anxiety can motivate us, so it's not all bad. The next emotions that I wanted to look at were around sadness and depression, because I think often we want to avoid pain. I mean, human beings are so lazy. Like, we want to take the route of least resistance, and so we're always looking for a way to avoid any anxiety, any stress, any pain that that might be caused through anything that we do. And often when we change a behaviour, we start to feel quite anxious, quite stressed, or we get in touch with feelings that perhaps we didn't realise we had, like sadness and depression. And actually, again, these emotions are normal because it gives us a sign that there's something that's hurt us, and it needs healing. And often we don't want to do that deeper work because it's painful. And why would you want to look at some of the things in your past that have hurt you? And why would you want to address some of the relationships that hurt you? Because it means a change. And sometimes I think change is really challenging, especially when we're used to the status quo. So really understanding your fears and anxieties, and also your sadness and your depression can really be keys to kind of unlock some of this roller coaster journey. And the next thing I want to say, and this really comes from cognitive behavioural therapy, and this is in some ways how the brain works, is that actually when we experience something, our brain remembers the experience. And actually what we do then is, it's almost like we kind of go into automatic thought, and we switch off from really thinking about it. So what happens is that instead of having an interpretation process, it's almost like an instinctive response. And in cognitive behavioural therapy, we call this ABC. So activating event, behaviour, and consequence. And really your behaviour is an automatic response to the event. So if someone says something to you that touches on something that's not healed inside, or that makes you feel sad or anxious, that sometimes we can just like have a response without even really thinking about it. And I hope that one of the milestones, or the actionable steps that you're going to see through this process, is that you're going to start to understand, like, what are your triggers? What are the things in your life that make you just respond automatically without even thinking about it? And what we're going to start to do, as we get an awareness and bring an awareness to these things, we're going to start to have a very different response. And it doesn't mean that you won't behave in the same way as you did before, but it will mean that you think about it. And if we can increase the opportunity to think about it and to explore it, actually the way you behave, the consequence, the outcome of that is more likely to change, because actually it's something you've chosen, rather than just automatically done. So there are some common findings with emotional eating and eating disorders, and I think it's really important to know these things, because often I think that, you know, because of some of the shame and the stigma and the judgment people experience, they feel like there's something wrong with them. But actually these common characteristics and common findings have been found in in many people. So I just want to say to you that you're not alone out there, and you're not the only one experiencing this. So eating disorders are hereditary, and individuals seem to have similar temperaments. So people that are highly anxious, people that have obsessive behaviour, perfectionism, and are very achievement orientated, tend to struggle more with eating disorders. So when the characteristics were studied, it was people who had been in families where overeating or compulsive eating or even restrictive eating, which is the other end of the spectrum, they all had these similar characteristics. And so I guess they're behaviours that have been passed down or learned that actually makes you more predisposed to having a problem around food. And then as well, there's something around the faulty reward processing system, which is similar, which was similar across all the subtypes of eating disorders. So what we were just talking about, the brain and the neurobiology, which we will get into a bit more around that. But actually, people with binge eating disorders or compulsive eating disorders, when the dopamine was transmitted, the neurotransmitters directed the dopamine around the brain, they were more motivated and more relaxed, actually, because the dopamine that was stimulated in people that had binge eating or overeating, compulsive eating, was more present in the brain. Whereas with anorexic people, when they ate, that actually the dopamine that was released was understimulated, and there was less dopamine in the brain. So there's something neurological that's happening in your brain, when you eat too much, that it's sending a message to your body to say, this is really good, this is really relaxing, do it more. So actually, how do we start to rewire those faulty signals? And in order to rewire the faulty signals, we need to be able to understand what the signals are that we're sending to our brain. Also within this process, in the orbitofrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that signals to the body to stop eating, that these triggers are really impacted by our thoughts. And actually, if you look at stress, anxiety, depression as a whole, the thoughts that we think can literally poison us. Like when we are thinking negatively all the time, it actually releases toxic energy and poisons us. So, and we really need to understand, what are we talking to ourselves all the time? Because often I find that actually people who have really struggled with emotional eating, and whether it's with eating disorders per se, whether it's on the emotional eating end or the restrictive eating end, always have a really, really, really negative self-talk, a really negative self-talk. And it's probably controlled by this kind of perfectionism, obsession, overachievement, and anxiety that people are experiencing. And actually, whenever I work with anyone, the very, very first thing I do is get them to fill out a self-assessment around, anxiety and depression, because I think often with eating disorders or emotional eating, binge eating, people really don't understand that they might have some kind of depression or anxiety or other mental health issue that's impacting on the eating disorder. These things often do not travel alone, so it's important to understand the whole picture, so you would get that as part of this program. And then the last thing I just want to leave you with is that cravings for food can be triggered by imagination, smells, sights, and tastes of food. And when we anticipate food or eat, it activates the neural systems that create the pleasure and reward response. So actually sometimes our eating is, or what triggers us to eat is our senses, and that actually we're not really hungry and it's not an emotion, it's something that we're experiencing through our sense gates. So I hope this has been like a really useful introduction. I'm more than happy to give you a free consultation. If you fill out the application form, which is on this page, and send it to me, myself or someone from our team will be in touch with you. And I hope that you found this useful. Thank you. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your time.